1991. Birds and people are living together in seemingly perfect harmony, until one day a young man catches fire. This is Phoenix.
All right. Excuse me. Man, that song is catchy, bro. My name is 12 Gauge, and I am your host. And this is 12 Gauge Investigative. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you guys for being here. Um, all of you in the chat. Yeah, once your month is up, then then you either have to renew your membership, or I just gave away some memberships, I think last night. So I don't know. Welcome, Sherry. Welcome, Aquarius Rondi. Glad that you are here. And anybody else who happened to be watching that is not in the chat. So tonight we're going to talk about some IDAHO4 stuff. So I decided to get on here and talk a little bit about this. I'm kind of in a chill mood tonight, so not gonna use all the language and stuff that I used the last time I was up here. Anyways, I'm gonna try not to go long tonight because I want to hit the gym before bed. So let's get on with this. This is gonna be from a video that I made already. So it's gonna have some stuff already from the past in here, but it's still good information nonetheless. I posted this 5 months ago, and it didn't have a lot of views, so hopefully we can get more than 19 views tonight. So as you can tell, look, it's myself up there on the stage there. How's everybody doing tonight? It's like Wednesday, full moon tomorrow. Great stuff, right? October is about halfway through already. It's just crazy. Crazy. Hey, Randy, how you doing? Thank you for being here. You're chill too, Aquarius, so maybe the full moon has us all chilled out. Sometimes the full moon works different on certain people. I know I get usually really sleepy or whatever around a full moon. So, you just never know. So let's go ahead and hear what 12 has to say. I want y'all to be mindful. This was 5 months ago, plus it has some older stuff in here. But I think this has some good information that we can talk about. Anyways, I hear people talking a lot of stuff about this case, all different portions of it. So hopefully um you enjoy this.
University of Idaho students savagely stabbed to death in the middle of the night, with police pressed for answers from a frightened community. Many wondering, is the case? Investigators work around the clock to try to provide answers. Good afternoon to you, folks. JB here with you live on WFLA Now. Of course, we are talking about the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students. We have been talking, of course, about Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Gonzalez, all, of course, 20 or 21 years old. A tragic story that has been unfolding at the University of Idaho. And as we cover this story, and you just heard there in our package from News Nation's Brian Enton, and Brian Enton will be joining us in about 20 minutes from now for kind of the latest as where things stand here today, this Wednesday. You heard him say that investigators are hoping that witnesses come forward with information, that witnesses provide something that will be the witnesses don't ever provide that break in the case. What if witnesses don't have the information that police are desperately seeking, investigators desperately seeking to provide justice to these 4 families and to the University of Idaho community? What if evidence is really going to be the key to this case? Well, great that we have experts from the University of South Florida joining us here live on stream. Professors Peter Massey and Thomas Heislip joining us, taking time out of their day to join us. And Peter and Thomas have very specific focuses and different focuses, and that's why it's great to have them both here on the live stream. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen. Peter, why don't we begin with you?
Before these guys start talking, I want to talk just very briefly on something. I was thinking about this earlier because I don't know if y'all read my community post about Kaylee's sister and a letter that she wrote to her sister. I got that off the Facebook page, the Gonsalves Facebook page. One thing about these whole murders that is very interesting that sometimes people don't really take into account is there's a lot of people affected by these things. There's 2 other victims that nobody really ever talks about. There's Dylan and there's Bethany and their families. I heard somebody talking the other night about the families are not victims. The victims are the victims, and I was thinking to myself, how the hell are the families not victims of this brutal murder? How is that possible? What do y'all think about that? Whenever you hear somebody say the families aren't the victims are the victims. Have you ever had something tragic happen to you and your family was affected by it? Have you ever had to go away to college and your family was affected when you were young, right? Because they missed you. If you went away to college in another state, or let's say you lost a family member at a young age, maybe your parents were divorced, all kinds of things affect families in a different variety. So, whenever somebody says that people's families are not affected, that they're not victims of circumstance, I'd like to think in a different manner on that. You know, even Brian's family, and I've talked about this before, and this by no means does this mean that I've changed my stance on what I said the other night. I don't change my stance at all. But what I'm saying is the families are victims of all this stuff that's going on. You know what I mean? So, um, whenever somebody says that, I'm like, how can you believe that? Honestly, that the families have nothing to do with this. It's just about the 4. Well, whenever you're talking bad about a particular family, and this is my point, whenever you're talking bad about a particular family, think about what I just said about Autumn Gonsalves. And if you haven't read that on my community page, go check that out, man. It's like a little sister's letter to her older sister. And it just, man, it just pulls at you. It just pulls at you. I don't know how anybody could be that callous to say such horrible things about that family when they know that there's more than two people in that family. You know, they put everybody in a box. You know, this family, that family, this family's good, that family's bad. You know, it's like, come on, man. Come on. Quit worrying about your views. Quit worrying about your clicks. Quit worrying about people unsubbing because your statements are not what they want to hear. And go with what your heart really thinks. And if that's what your heart really thinks, quit saying justice for the four because you're not believing in justice. You're believing that people are condensed in one little area, and that's the only people that were involved in all this tragedy. There's a lot of people involved. Even the people that found the victims, they're affected. And I'm sure their families are affected because they were affected. You know, it's an endless cycle. So it's just very closed minded to think that nobody was affected but the four people that died. That is a very closed minded mindset. But let me quit with that and let me let you get back to these people.
Explain to our audience here your background and what your special focus is when it comes to the very, very vast field of forensic sciences.
Sure. Thank you for having us. My background is I was law enforcement for 20 years. 10 of that was processing crime scenes. My educational background is in forensic science, so I kind of mix both the scientific aspect of it as well as the scene aspect of it.
Terrific. Thomas, yourself?
Yeah, hi, JB. I spent 23 years with the federal government, split between the Secret Service and the Department of Defense as a special agent. And for 22 of those years, I focused on cybercrime investigation and digital forensics. And that's what I now teach at the University of South Florida.
I'm sure that both of you have been following this case with great interest because really folks and experts in the field of forensic sciences have been following this case across the country. You don't have to be in Idaho, of course, to know about the stabbing deaths of the 4 University of Idaho students. Let me just give you both the opportunity. I'll throw you both up here on screen to speak in general about what you think of the case at this particular stage as we approach now a month with a killer still on the loose. Thomas, why don't we start with you?
All right, thanks, JB. I think my impression initially and now is that, and Peter can speak more of this in a moment, the traditional forensics, there may not be the smoking gun at the scene, and that's why it's taken a while. But the digital forensics will hopefully lead to potential clues that can lead to a suspect or hopefully an arrest.
Peter,
See, even after almost a month after the crimes, we have a professional talking about digital evidence. So obviously, all this stuff that's going on now, you can look back and it was already known then. So it's not like a lot of this had been hidden or created out of the blue. I'm sure even before the arrest, they had certain digital evidence that they could present as probable cause for his arrest, whether he did it or whether he didn't. You know, it's interesting how people's conspiracies and how they want to paint the narrative of how the police tainted the crime scene, how the police planted the sheath, you know, certain things like that. And these two individuals on the screen have 40 years between them experience in police forensics or some kind of law enforcement detail. So why would they get on here and basically lie about what they know or what they have encountered in their own careers. They wouldn't. I'm so cool, I can make somebody else sound just like me and talk just like me. He's talking kind of slow tonight. I don't know what was up with that dude, but let's get on with it, 12 gauge. But yet, when it comes to the YouTube community, many people are still hell bent on not believing people that have expertise and believing people that are just entertainers on these YouTube streets. And that's all they are, is entertainers. They're people that get on here day in, day out. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. And never give you any kind of evidentiary understanding of the evidence that's being presented to you. They talk about hours and hours and hours. And after you watch them, you're no closer to understanding anything. So the next day they can just pick up where they left off. And to the viewer, it's just a continuum of a soap opera that they've been watching for a year and some months now.
You've been following the case, I'm sure, to an extent. What can you provide as far as what you've been witnessing here from the University of South Florida?
Well, two things. One is obviously, we care about the families. We understand that the trauma that they're going through. But from the forensic side, what we need to understand is it takes time to run these examinations at the laboratory. There are other crimes or other cases that are coming in, so we still have to deal with that as far as the laboratory goes. So in time, we're going to get some answers, but it is going to take some time.
I'm very grateful to have you both because, again, going back to what I was just talking about, ideally, in a perfect world, a witness comes forward, sees something, a friend, a family member, somebody has some key piece of information that breaks the case. But if it doesn't shake out that way, as so many other cases do, if it actually does come down to evidence, it could be physical evidence, which, of course, Peter, you are an expert in as far as crime scene and crime scene reconstruction. Thomas, you're going to be able to speak to us a little bit about digital evidence. And in addition, that body camera video that I'm going to ask you about here in a minute from the 911.
If you aren't sure what digital evidence they're talking about, they would be talking about the cell phone. They would be talking about the body cams as they arrived to the crime scene and what they saw, what they observed. Also, it could be down to the scanning of the crime scene, getting the measurements and any kind of video pictures or, anything like that that can kind of demonstrate all that's at the crime scene. And the digital evidence would be kind of like the phone pings and also the text messages or anything in the cell phone that could identify any kind of evidence that could point one way or the other towards getting the killer apprehended. Hey, Leslie, thank you for being here. Paula, thank you for being here as well. So does that make sense? Do y'all understand the digital evidence portion of it? Because they're about to talk about that. They're talking about the forensic portion of it. Because these two guys, that's what they do for a living.
On one call that came overnight. But I want to bring up some video here. This is video from the you're about to see it play here on your screen from the crime labs in Idaho, the state crime labs. 113 pieces of evidence have been collected, or I believe more than 113 pieces of evidence now. When it comes to Peter processing what has been described at great length as a very complex and difficult crime scene, you're talking about a 3-level residence, not just a residence that is home to, of course, the people that live there, but as far as Ethan Chapin's relationship, him being the boyfriend.
So you're telling me that 113 pieces of evidence, this is going to be enough to convict somebody and possibly put them to death if they run out of appeals. 113 pieces of evidence. That's not a lot. But obviously it's enough to bring this individual before a trial or before a jury and potentially have his life in their hands. Think about that. 113 pieces of evidence. Okay, I got to interject there, 12 gauge. Let me ask you guys in the chat, do you believe that 113 pieces of evidence, okay, this is physical evidence, I would be willing to guess. Do you believe that that is, in the little area that the crime scene happened, that would be the third floor bedroom, that would be the second floor bedroom. Do you believe that that's a lot of evidence? Or do you believe that that's not a lot of evidence? Because we're talking about physical evidence here. Do you believe that that's a lot or that it's not? Because so many times we hear, well, there's not any evidence. There's not any evidence. The PCA is crap. The PCA was just a script, a movie script. The cops are, they're involved. They're trying to hide things. We know, I'm sure that if any of those theories are holding true at the time of the trial, it will be brought to light. But what I'm asking you today is, do you feel that 113 pieces of evidence are enough to potentially convict somebody? Have you heard of less than that? Have y'all heard any cases that you've looked into where there's been less evidence and the person was convicted? Because, I mean, that sounds like if those pieces of evidence, they be, um, I can't even imagine what those things would be, whether it be like blood, fibers, maybe hair, anything, Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. But, I'm just asking you guys if you've ever heard of a case where that amount or less has convicted somebody. Because that's what you have to be um think thinking like, because that's what this case is going to be based on. Not just two or three pieces. There's going to be 113 plus whatever amount of um digital, which is like the terabytes and things like that. So just a question for you guys. Take out 113 pennies and that's all you got. That's all the evidence you have. It's not a lot.
Of course, of one of the students as well. And then, of course, it's a college residence. You have people coming and going, the people coming over either to study or to party, have a good time, to play video games, whatever it might be. A lot of traffic coming in there. So, in your estimation, how complex of a crime scene do you believe this to be?
Oh, this is going to be amazing. The amount of work that needs to be done by the law enforcement community in this case is overwhelming. You have at least 3 separate crime scenes that need to be processed. If not, the vehicles, anything else that.
No, they're not saying that, Kim. They're saying that it's just 113 pieces of evidence at the crime scene, not any relating to being tied to Brian. We haven't heard one way or the other at this point.
That came out of there. So it's going to take a long time to finish. The other thing that you mentioned there, JB, was it's a college home. There are people coming and going all the time. When we start to look at biological evidence, the information is it foreign or has that person been to that house before? And that's something that the investigators are going to have to filter out.
Let me ask you this. You just mentioned a little bit how long it's going to take, Peter, to process this evidence. There's obviously, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a tremendous amount.
Because usually we need to get into the mindset of listening to the evidence is listed in two different ways, one inculpatory or one exculpatory. So exculpatory would be evidence that you find that would prove that the perpetrator was not connected to it. Inculpatory would be the evidence that you're trying to prove that ties the crime scene to the perpetrator. So if you're looking at it in those ways, that's how in the legal system it's identified. So if you can say inculpatory, this is the evidence that they found that would prove potentially that the perpetrator was connected to the crime scene, versus exculpatory, which would prove that the perpetrator was not connected to the crime scene.
Immense amount of pressure on multiple law enforcement agencies to produce results. There's also something we're going to talk about a little bit later on about how there's been this perceived fracture as far as the trust between law enforcement and the community and the families of the victims here. We'll get into all that in a little bit. But people, I think we live in a world where people want answers sooner rather than later. It's been described by some in the field of forensic sciences as the CSI effect, where you watch TV shows and you see how quickly it can all unfold within an hour with commercial breaks. It's not that simple as far as timeline, of course, you know, but as far as this complicated crime scene and it being that complex, what could be the time frame here? Are we talking weeks, months, years to sift through all this evidence and to actually process it and have it organized to the point where you could yield results from it?
Well, I think realistically, months would be an appropriate time frame, not weeks. If we get into the years, then we're talking about a cold case, and we need a lot more information going forward. I'm not so sure we're going to get to that point, but it is going to take time, and people need to understand that law enforcement wants to solve this case yesterday just as well as the community does. But they're also responsible for doing it the right way, knowing that ultimately this may end up in a courtroom, and the I's have to be dotted, the T's have to be crossed. And as you said, JB, the community is much more attuned to all of this type of investigation because of television, media, and the such.
And there is a term for that. It's called the CSI effect. People get in their mind that they feel that this evidence that is presented should be so quickly processed that it's just almost like the CSI that they see on TV, that it should be solved in almost like an hour, like he just said. But to be realistic, it's not that true. I mean, to be fair, there might, have been collecting evidence all the way until the last day of having to turn it all in and disclose it to the defense, because there was, even though it seems like a lot, it doesn't seem like a lot. We don't know exactly how much there is or how much is inculpatory or exculpatory. It's going to be proving itself come to trial for sure. And I think it's interesting to note also that whenever a crime scene is investigated, there's different levels of what we talked about in the past. There's different levels of teams that go in throughout the house that they have different duties. Like there might be the fingerprint, the DNA team, the blood, any bodily fluids, any fibers, any kind of foreign material, anything like that. There might be teams just doing that, just collecting that. And then there's the team that has the furo imaging that would be, scanning the whole residence where the crime occurred so they would be able to show the 3D imaging in the trial now that the house is no longer there. So there's a lot of different teams involved in collecting all this evidence. And this is early on. So I know it talking about the case going cold because 5 months ago when I presented these videos were already old. So at one point they were talking about the case going cold because they didn't have any kind of information that they were sharing with the public whatsoever.
Let me take the same question over to you, Thomas, because obviously the processing and analyzing of physical evidence versus digital evidence, there's obviously so many different factors at play. But we know that there are probably mountains of digital evidence, most of it probably, I'm sure, circled on each one of the victims' phones. And also, too, I'm sure if there's any persons of interest, and we have to be very, very careful with labels because when it comes to suspects, persons of interest, there isn't really anything tangible to go on in this case based on what, of course, investigators are saying. But when it comes to these phones, social media activity, cell phone pings, is it realistic as far as expecting results sooner than physical evidence, or is that incorrect to think that way?
It's incorrect to think that way, JB. You can get some quick, immediate results on some monitoring. So if you had the device, like a cell phone, you can look at the email, the text, the social media post. But to look at it in a bigger picture, it's going to take months, the same as what Peter said for the physical evidence. And a lot of that comes down to, if you think about the digital footprint, was a term we teach. Everything you do online, you're leaving breadcrumbs and potential evidence. We have to collect all that and put it together. Well, to collect that, you have to get court orders, search warrants to multiple entities, to the ISPs, to the email providers, to the cell phone providers. Send them get the court order, send the court order, get the return back from the company, and then analyze it. And they can take weeks to a month to get that data back to you. And so waiting on that data to come back, the data you don't have immediately on a device. And so, yeah, months is a realistic time frame.
So similar to waiting on DNA test results. It's not just because it's digital and just because technology has advanced so mightily over the last couple of decades. It's not instantaneous. They could still be going through digital evidence even well beyond Christmas, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, they could be waiting on digital evidence from, say, an email provider, right? You have the immediate email on the phone, but all the emails not on the phone. There could be, stuff stored in the servers, and you have to send a search warrant to that email provider to get that data from them, and they can still be waiting to receive that data and not even have it yet. And then when they get it, it takes time to analyze it. And if they're doing that for multiple accounts, from email to social media, you got to ingest all that, analyze it, do it properly. It takes a long time.
And that's something I've always wondered. With how high profile of a case, this is without question the most high profile murder investigation in the country right now. If you are a cellular provider with particular data on the cell phone and ping locations, if you have forensic data on an email, or if you're a social media giant like TikTok or Facebook or Twitter and you have this information, do investigators have an ability to expedite the process to get some of that data back faster from some of these private companies that aren't in the public sector, like getting back data from, let's say, TikTok or Twitter or something to that effect? How can they speed up the process, or can they not?
Well, you can ask and hope that they'll, because it's such a high profile case, that they'll get it to you sooner, but you can't make that, right? I mean, the law is clear. They respond in their time frame. But usually they're pretty good about it. Something this high profile, they're going to turn it around quickly for you, move it to the front of the line. The problem is, you identify one of the suspects' emails, you request that information, you get that back, and then you go through those emails. And when you go through those emails, you say you identify 6 other email addresses of other individuals. So wait, we got to collect these 2 because these are unknown, or there's some potential clues in there. Now you got to send 6 more.
He brings up an interesting point there, because how many times, and I mean, we have an individual that we know well that, has multiple different names that he signs into chats with. And this is just common knowledge. So I'm not saying anything that throws shade on him at all. But think about if Brian, the perpetrator who's been arrested for this case, had multiple emails that they found digitally, on his computer. Let's say that he didn't have a primary email address, that he had multiple email addresses where he was shown either downloading material, where he was, let's say he had different email addresses connected to social media sites. Because think about this, and I don't think if you've ever really thought about this, but if you were gonna digitally stalk somebody on social media, would you really use your email address? Would you use your work address or email address? Would you use your email address that is your personal email address? Or would you create different email addresses attached to different social media apps or things like that? Tell me, would you be blatant enough to use your own email to connect to social media applications? What do y'all think? Is this thing on? This thing on? What do y'all think? Surely he wouldn't use his own email address to connect. So let's say you download Facebook, right? You download the Facebook app. It's going to ask you to create a profile, right? So when you're creating a profile, you're putting in fictitious names, fictitious address, fictitious everything, right? So once you get to the email, because everything is connected through email on all these social media accounts. So you would need a different email account if you didn't want to be having your browsing, what you've done, anything to be seen, because you have to create a different account. You have to create a fake account. Yes or no? I guess I'll leave y'all to think about that for a second.
Search warrants to their email providers and collect their data, and it just keeps, every step is another time delay.
Let me bring everybody back on screen here for a second. You see the hashtags are on your screen. We're going to be trying to take as many questions and comments as possible on this live stream for them for about another 5 to 10 minutes while we have Peter and while we have Thomas. We also have Brian Enton, of course, standing by. I'll ask our moderators, of course, on our social media platforms to, again, encourage our hashtag system as far as getting a comment displayed on screen. Before we start to go to some of the comments, we have a few on Twitter here coming in as well. Peter, I want to ask you about one particular note that I find very interesting. No broken windows at the residence, no signs of forced entry or busted door. What does that inform you as a crime scene expert, a crime scene reconstruction expert, about what transpired the night of November 12th and November 13th at this residence in Idaho?
One thing that comes to mind is, having been to college, we locked our doors. We didn't leave our doors unlocked. So there was access 24/7 back in the day. I tend to think that, again, college kids live that way as well. They don't lock things up. And you're in Moscow, Idaho. You're not in some high crime-ridden location. So I could see the tone being lowered in that regard. On the other side, if that's not the case and nothing was left open, then it obviously is indicative of somebody who knew somebody in that house and was freely admitted into that home.
We have a question coming in from Brittany on Twitter, and it says,
Okay, so he said it could be that the perp knew somebody in that home and would let in. There was no broken windows, no broken doors. And I know that a lot of this has already been spoken on multiple times, but I wanted to take a minute and get you to think on the wording of what these individuals are talking. You know, if you're going up the stairs and you're going into the first room, what are the chances that that door was open or was it closed and locked? So if it was closed and locked, how did it get in? You know, and if Murphy was in the other room, did he stay there the whole time? Did Murphy follow Kaylee out as she was going to Maddie's room? Was Xana's door locked? Did she open it on the way back after getting the DoorDash? Was the bathroom door locked? Had these individuals stayed behind these locked doors if they were locked? Could that have potentially saved their lives? Seeing that the perpetrator didn't want to break down any doors or anything, there would have been, you know, evidence of that. Also, that's a good comment, PKC. I mean, and we've discussed that a little bit in some other videos that I have. Jeff and I discussed that in depthly, where, you know, he or she could have lifted that up and got in the slider and then got in the house. But one thing that's interesting to me is taking one of the aggravators away. That would mean that the burglary was no longer an intent. It's like he wasn't intending to commit burglary while he was going to murder these people, you know? So, also early on, I remember hearing that the house was really like a description that Dylan gave of the upstairs was, or, you know, around where she could hear. It sounded like people were rummaging through things looking for something. What were they looking for if that is the case? I remember hearing that more than once. And it's not in the PCA, so I can't very well say it's evidence. But hearing it made me think at the time, what were they looking for? Were they looking for money? Because if you're rummaging through stuff, that means you're looking for something important. Overturning furniture, this, that, and the other, that could have been the scuffle. That could have been the defensive wounds. But the rummaging through things made me think of what they could have been
tag,
looking for.
hey JB, I don't know exactly what she means by releasing, but she says, when does law enforcement plan on releasing the crime scene? And I guess what she means by that, right now there's still, you know, crime scene tape up around the house. It is still obviously an extremely important asset as far as the investigation is concerned. But a lot of questions, of course, pertaining to the house. What do we say for Brittany's question?
Well, look, unfortunately, there's no time when the answer is going to be when they're done and when they've checked and double checked and triple checked. You brought up, JB, this is a high profile case right now. Everybody's eyes are looking on it. So as far as the investigators go, they also have eyes being viewed upon them. So they're going to check to make sure that all their evidence is collected. Like Thomas said, if you jump down that rabbit hole, maybe they're finding some sort of biological evidence there and they need to go back into the house. As long as they hold that house, the search warrant is good. If they give up the house, they have to go back and get another search warrant to get back into the house for additional evidence. So the short answer is when they're done.
Peter, we're looking here at video of the vehicles getting towed away recently in the last week, also as well as at.
I mean, also, this just crossed my mind just now. As you know, you can visually go into a house and visually look around and observe evidence, okay? If there is probable cause that a crime has been committed. So if you see paraphernalia like drugs, or do you see, what the word? Yeah, I just said it, paraphernalia. If you see like there's pipes on the table, there's, I don't know, razor blades, or there's stuff that you use the drugs, there's matches, lighters, all kinds of stuff that insinuate that there was drug use going on. You can't really tag and bag that until you get a search warrant. It's whatever you see with the visual eye can be used as evidence. But in order to gather the evidence, you need a search warrant. You can't just go in there and start grabbing stuff just because it is illegal to have this or have that. So many people get stuck on the 8-hour time frame. So think about these policemen walking into this house. They already know that something is up because, as we've been told, you could smell the scent of blood as soon as the officer entered the house. So you can smell that automatically. You've been conditioned to know, okay, there's been a crime that occurred here. Where is this blood smell coming from? And I have to find that. So you're walking around, you're looking around, you're trying not to touch anything because you understand that it is a crime scene. So therefore, you're trying to decompress the whole crime scene where it doesn't get contaminated. But you don't know who's been in the house, who's still in the house. You're probably trying to get everybody who could still be in the residence or lurking around outside into the front, corralled so nobody's going off that could be a potential witness, so that you can interview later. Chances are there was only 2 or 3 officers that arrived at the very beginning. So can you imagine being 2 or 3 people trying to keep this crime scene from being contaminated more than it probably was? Because 8 hours is a long time. It's a long time. You don't know how many people potentially were in this house touching things, taking pictures, um, going in and out of Dylan's room, consoling each other. I mean, you don't know because we really don't know when those kids got there. We were told by so many people they arrived at 9:30, 10 o'clock. But I don't know if that's true or not because it hasn't been stated anywhere. We just heard it along the way. So even if it was 5 minutes before, the phone call, the 911 call was made, did they go all the way upstairs to the second floor? Other than the person who opened that door and saw those 2 individuals in there, was he the only one in the house? Were the other people outside the house? Was there any people that walking through the floor? How many footprints did they potentially have to identify? Was there a lot of latent prints? Is that one latent print that they found? Was that somebody else's shoe print from earlier in the morning? You know, all these things have to be taken into account whenever you're processing a crime scene. You just can't walk in and assume that just because you see it, that that's all there is. You know, you don't know if the perpetrator touched the railing of the staircase, you know, the awning part. You don't know that he touched the wall. I mean, you don't know if anything was, you know, anything like that was done. You don't know what was already there, what was brought into the scene. You know, you just don't know. You don't know how long those dishes had been there. Were they there that morning? Were they there that night? Did the perpetrator touch any of those things? Did the perpetrator brush up against anything? You know, I know what the PCA says. I've read it. I've heard other people read it. I'm not going to pull it up to read it again because, you know, by this point everybody knows what's in it and what's not in it. And what's not in it has to do with the minuscule evidence gathering that they were doing that is probably a big portion of this case. The stuff that is sealed, I would assume. And that's my opinion. What do y'all think?
Video that I think you're going to see here in just a moment of brown bags being taken. I think just in the last several days, they're still obviously collecting evidence from the house. Does that surprise you 3 weeks after the murders took place, or is that kind of status quo for forensic investigators?
It is surprising that it is this long. But as I said, they're
I do have a question. I keep stopping this. I do have a question. It says, Rondi asked, with different blood types, would they be able to tell if one of the victims or more were in their bedrooms or other rooms in the house? I'm speculating here, okay? So, um, I would say that if there was any of the other victims, let's say they supposedly started on the third floor, so let's say that some of that blood was transferred to Xana and Ethan's room, or even in the hallway. There's two different set of blood from those two victims. So if any of that blood was on the floor or any of that blood was on the wall along the way, or even found in Xana and Ethan's room, there would possibly be a good reason for it because it might be on the killer, it might be on the killer's knife, it could be on anything that the killer was transferring from one room to the other. I mean, that could explain how the blood got from one place to the other. I mean, obviously there's going to be DNA on that knife from four different people, or if the individual cut themselves with a knife, there could be also the individual DNA intermingled with all the other DNA that's in the blood that's mixed together. You know what I mean? But that's just my opinion.
double checking everything. This is such a high profile case right now. We have such young individuals who have been brutally attacked and killed. So again, it's a matter of doing it the right way. When they're done, they're done.
Yeah, Love is asking here, Love a Scorpio, hashtag KJB, why weren't the cars taken off the property immediately? Peter, do you have any ideas as to why the cars were left? I mean, it might not be a primary focus of the investigation, at least in the days, the immediate aftermath of the bodies being discovered in the house. But do you have any answer as to why it was so late as far as them removing it from the property?
Yeah, I think go along with exactly what you said. That's not the primary scene. The primary scenes were inside, so there's really no rush to pull those vehicles out. I don't know whether they did some investigating inside before it looks like the snow came. They did anything at the scene, or if everything was towed out and investigated, at an impound lot or a secure facility. But there's really no rush for that.
Let's continue to ask for your questions and comments on screen as we have, again, Peter Massey, Thomas Heislip joining us from the University of South Florida, forensic experts in different ways. Peter focusing on crime scenes, Thomas focusing on digital forensics and cyber crimes. Let me ask you guys this question as far as the amount of pressure that is on investigators at this stage. social media, online sleuthing, all a component in how people are analyzing this, and in doing so in real time. How difficult is it for the forensic investigators and really just detectives in general to be able to tunnel vision and focus in on just the task at hand while blocking out all the outside noise? And when I say outside noise, I'm not even just talking about people tweeting and people sharing TikTok videos. I'm talking about even, look, members of the victims' families have been very critical in not getting more answers from law enforcement. There not being this open channel of communication. They have spoke in interviews with News Nation and some other media outlets saying that they are frustrated with this process and how tight-lipped it has been. So all the pressure, all the noise, all of the criticisms that are taking.
And since you're talking about that, I also want to debunk something that's been stated that I heard that was stated. An individual on his YouTube channel was stating that the prosecutor is the one that filed for the gag order. That is incorrect. That is incorrect. From the very beginning, the defense has stated clearly more than once that they wanted to make sure that Brian had a fair trial. They even filed for the change of venue. This individual was incurring that the prosecutor was the one that wanted to change the venue. They also were incurring that the questionnaire was put out there by the prosecution. The prosecutor was the one who elicited the questionnaire out into Moscow, which I don't believe that's correct. I could be wrong, but I don't believe that's correct. I believe that it was the defense that was pushing that questionnaire out into Moscow. But I know for a fact that the prosecutor did not push for a change of venue. And that just sounded very strange to me when this person said that. You know, I was like, why would you say that? Why would you say that? I guess just to make it look like, once again, one-sided. One-sided. Because if we make it look one-sided, then it makes it look like there's people conspiring against one side. And if we look at any case in America, any case, kind of like the Delphi case that's fixing to go to trial, they're gathering the jury's panel up and everything else like that. Well, it's a given that it's prosecutor versus defense. It's a given. So anybody that believes that the prosecutor is not trying to find the defendant guilty is really sadly mistaken. And the defense is trying to find their client not guilty, trying to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that their client is not guilty. So it is a game of back and forth. So to be pushing that narrative as if there's something nefarious or malicious going on behind the scenes, that's what a court trial is. That's what everything's all about, is trying to get your client off or to convict them. It's just that.
Place and coming in from multiple directions, is it difficult to block out the noise, or are you so honed in on the task at hand that you're just focusing on getting justice for these families? Thomas, why don't we start with you?
You can block out the noise, as you say, from, say, third parties on Twitter, but the problem where you get the pressure as an investigator is from your internal agency, the government, the district attorney's office. You have elected officials you're reporting to, and eventually, off the chain, they're getting a lot of pressure, and then it comes down to you, and they're looking for you to solve this as quick as possible. And well, you can stay focused and work your case that the way it needs to be worked. You're well aware that everything you're being watched, and the pressure is on because your bosses are getting pressure from the political people above them. So it's a challenge. You just have to stay the course, because the one thing you can't do, and Peter mentioned it early, and this is on any investigation, but especially something this high profile, you get pressure and you make a mistake, and then they catch somebody, it goes to court. Well, what if that person now goes free because of your mistake, because you fell to that pressure? So that's why you just have to block it out the best you can and push forward. But it's not easy, and there is a lot of pressure, especially in something this high profile.
Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, no, to tag on to what Thomas said, the pressure is coming from above. The agency that you work for, agencies that are involved, are getting pressure from the media, are getting pressure from the family, and are getting pressure from those above them to solve this case. And again, as Tommy said, we cannot afford to make a mistake. Let me just say one thing about the families. This is a great situation to show the value of a victim advocate, that person who is the liaison between law enforcement and the family. We cannot share with the family every bit of information for fear that they may go public because of whatever. So, again, we feel for the families, but we also have that job to do. And it's that very fine line between what we can let the families know and what nobody needs to know until we get to that arrest.
There's obviously been a lot discussed as far as the communication between all of these parties that are in play here. And I'm talking about, of course, the victims, starting with the victims' families. And they just wanting justice, and really more than justice eventually, but answers to begin.
And what he just said is correct too. What that gentleman just said, Peter Massey, he said they cannot share every bit of piece of information with the family, which is true. But when you're trying to figure stuff out, I guess it would be, we want to know what happened. Well, if the wrong information gets out there and gets to the killer's going to be one step ahead of the police. It's kind of like all these other old cases that you hear about. It's kind of like the night stalker. He would be reading the newspaper and they would be printing what the police knew, where they were going next with their surveillance or whatever. And he would be reading all this, so he'd be one step ahead of the police. And it was hard to catch him because he was onto all their tactics. So a lot of times silence is golden in these cases, and that's one of the reasons why. I mean, we all want to know. Hell, we want to know today. What do they all have? What don't they have? What are they talking about? Where are they going as far as their defense strategy? Where are they going with their prosecution strategy? We want to know. But unfortunately, at this point, we can't find out until the trial. And that's what makes this so aggravating. Because, it gives individuals like myself and other creators, I guess, the opportunity to fill in those blanks for individuals until we do actually find out.
Begin with. Of course, then you have just the public, you have detectives and the investigators that are working this case, and then you have reporters like us that are prodding for questions to, of course, make sure that we have something to report on a daily basis. I want to ask you both this question as well. Peter, you noted it a short time ago, talking about how this is not a community, nor is this really a state in general that is used to there being high-profile crime. Other states might be different, but I can't remember too many mass casualty incidents, murder mysteries unfolding in the state of Idaho. It's just not something that is really something that is all that occurs all that often. So when we're talking about the resources available, and there's been so much made of the state labs in Idaho, so much made of the local police department, the resources, the staffing, what they have to use to actually to pursue justice in this case, the physical resources and then the manpower. Is the state, let me start with this question. State lab in Idaho similar to a state lab across the country? Are all state laboratories, as far as forensics and the technology that they have available, it's not uniform. Not all 50 states have the same state labs. They're obviously all unique and all have, different amounts of funding that goes into it. But how different is it? And do you think that that comes into play as a potential challenge? Peter, why don't we start with you?
Now, look, the Idaho State Police lab is an accredited lab, so they need all of the qualifications, all of the certifications as any lab in any other state in the country. So they have everything from A to Z at their disposal. The difference is they don't have the size, they don't have the throughput that a larger lab in a larger community or a larger state may have. So they reach out to federal partners. What can the FBI do? What could ATF do? What could some of these other federal agencies do to help out? And they are there. The FBI is involved. Other federal agencies are involved in this case. So to the credit of the Moscow police, the university police, the state police, everybody, they've reached out to seek that guidance and that help.
Thomas, I want to ask you a question that I actually just got direct message to me, and it comes from Ginny, and I want to read this on screen if I may, just because I only have a couple more minutes with both of you gentlemen, and I have to get to Brian Enton, who's going to be joining us here in just a moment. Question from Ginny Tranter: do you believe that law enforcement would check the Wi-Fi device history at the crime scene house in Idaho? And she says, I'm not talking about internet search history. She's talking about like specific, just overall. I think it's a very long message and it's very well thought out, and I don't have time to read it in its entirety. But how detailed? Let me try to sum up the question from Ginny as how detailed and how granular can they get when it comes to the examination of the Wi-Fi data that came from the house, the internet connection to the house specifically?
Yeah, I'm sure they pulled the routing table from the Wi-Fi, from the Wi-Fi router. You can show all devices that have connected recently, any that are were currently connected at the time, any that may have a static IP reserved for the devices, which can then be tied to their MAC address, which you can then figure out who the manufacturer was, where it was sold, that kind of stuff, what kind of device it was in. So I'm sure that was not an initial step, because initially they're going to do the traditional forensics that Peter specializes in. But as they've been on the scene this long, I could pretty much assure you that the routing table from that router was pulled. All the information for the other devices that connected by Wi-Fi were also.
Do y'all believe that there was a password on that router, or their Wi-Fi connection? Do you think that there was a password that you had to have, or do you think it was like everything else in that house that everybody knew the password? I mean, because at one point in this whole case, I remember hearing Kaylee's dad talking about that he got so close, the individual got so close that he tapped into the Wi-Fi. So that makes me wonder if that is true. Was it commonly known, the password in that house? Or was it just set to, kind of like you go to a Starbucks, you sit in the parking lot, everybody can, plug into the Starbucks or the McDonald's or wherever. These places, they have the public Wi-Fi. I wonder if they had a Wi-Fi set up where they didn't have a password. Where, because you would think that, and I'm just speculating here because I've never been to Idaho or even Moscow for that matter, but you would believe if service was as bad as it is because of all the hills, all the trees, all that stuff, many people would want to have as much connection power as they could possibly get, even if it was coming from one house with the strongest signal. You know what I mean? I don't have a clue. What do y'all think about that? Do you think that he was able to tap into the Wi-Fi? Do you think that they had a password, or do you think that it was just set to public, like anybody could tap into it? Anybody have a thought on that? because it's interesting to me to think that the father would say that little piece of information. One, how would the individual get that close to knowing the password to be able to sign into their Wi-Fi? It's kind of like somebody driving by my house right now, and if it was set to public, they could sit outside and use my Wi-Fi, and I wouldn't even know it. You get what I'm saying? I used to know people that used to set their Wi-Fi and it always say FBI van or something like that. It'd be crazy. You'd be seeing people's Wi-Fi name as surveillance van or something like that. I mean, that's always intrigued me because I remember hearing that and I was thinking to myself, well, how in the hell could he tap into or whoever tap into their Wi-Fi if it had a password? And how would he know the password? I mean, he was a criminology student, but I mean, come on, man. That doesn't equal genius, you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm not certain that it was legit, Glenda. I'm not certain that it was, but I remember hearing that, and I was just thinking to myself as they're talking about the Wi-Fi as to how they would be able to tell if who was signed into your Wi-Fi router, you know. So let's keep going.
Collected.
And following up on that previous point that I'd asked Peter, not to cut off that conversation, Thomas, as far as the digital capabilities in Idaho, I would imagine that it's similar across the board for them as far as the information and technology that they have access to as far as proceeding with this investigation digitally, correct?
Yeah, I would imagine. I can't speak for the Moscow police, but the larger departments in the state are going to have people trained in this and know what to do to collect the digital evidence, and they're also going to rely on federal partners to help.
And the FBI being involved too just makes it even that much more. Just being able to use them as a resource and anything that they can do to provide technology, staffing, manpower, so on and so forth. Correct? Is the FBI's involvement obviously extraordinarily encouraging? Also, though, I would imagine frustrating from a public standpoint, because once the FBI gets involved, it's pretty much clamping the door shut on any comment to the public and releasing any sort of form of daily updates or getting the PIO standing in front of reporters and providing a daily press conference or anything like that. But the FBI's involvement, certainly a good thing as far as the technology and manpower that police have and detectives have available to them in this case, correct?
Yeah, it's really the big thing is the extra manpower, right? They have task forces, they have regional laboratories, they can set aside other cases, have them focus on the data from this case. And as Peter said, the big limitation for the smaller cities, smaller departments is the manpower, where you can now pool the resources through the FBI to keep this stuff processed faster.
Folks, we have to say farewell to both Professor Massey and Professor Hyslop. Before I do, you guys each have 30 seconds to just talk about what you're going to be monitoring from, of course, your vantage point from a forensic science standpoint as this investigation unfolds in Idaho.
If I'll go first, I'm waiting to see some of the DNA, the biological. Sharp force injuries usually lead to the perpetrator getting hurt. I'm waiting for the DNA evidence.
Me personally, I'm waiting to see the cell phone tower data, if they can identify a different ping from a different person who's normally not in that area with, from the data, it could provide leads to them and for them to investigate.
Thomas Hyslop, Peter Massey, experts in their respective fields and in the world of forensic sciences. Can't thank you guys enough for joining us here on stream. Really appreciate your time and your expertise, and a big thank you to the University of South Florida, USF, our neighbors here in Tampa Bay, for, of course, providing us with a direct link to Thomas and Peter, and them providing a little bit of a glimpse as to what might be going on behind the scenes for investigators in Idaho. Peter, Thomas, thank you so much.
Okay. So that was that. I just wanted to show you guys some of that earlier stuff because it's always interesting to go back in time, and even if you've heard the material 150,000 times, it's always interesting to look at it again. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. I hope you guys are having an awesome week so far. Do understand that it is a full moon tomorrow, so if you're acting a little crazy, it might be why. Just don't do anything too extreme. KMB, thank you for being here, bro. Been a while, right? Man, I don't. That day was just a bad day. That was just a bad day. I don't even know what happened that day that caused me to block you. I apologize for that. I hope you forgive me. I'm not usually a person that blocks people, but that day was just a bad day. I was on call. My phone was ringing. It was going off, and people were trying to. It was just a bad day all the way around. And people were like, "Oh, the chat caused you to just sign off." No, that's not what it was. It was I was on call and my phone's going off and I have all kinds of stuff going on. I was like, man, I just got to get done with this. You know what I mean? So yeah, it looks pretty full tonight. Yeah, but technically it's tomorrow the 17th. So you sent me an email, some solid advice. I don't know about solid, but I'll try. Can I show it on here or is it just for my eyes only? I'm waiting to get paid, man. Not from YouTube, but oh, gotcha. Yeah, why don't you give me a time where we can maybe do a StreamYard like we did and we can talk about it because I agree with you on that. I agree wholeheartedly about that. I would there's a lot of stuff going on YouTube that is really weird right now. I don't know what is in the water, what is on the YouTube streets, but that hurricane brought a lot of weird stuff, man, on these YouTube streets. Just try to stay out the mix. And I'm going to tell my audience right now because I know a lot of people have me mistaken for being an asshole and for being, very blunt and very abrasive. You know, like I said last night, I am a man, so you can't expect me to act like I'm not. You know what I mean? If something is said to me or somebody insinuates something to me, I'm going to respond. Whether this is the new me, this is the old me, this is whatever, I'm going to respond to it. Is it always the best way to do it at the moment? Probably not. Is it the best thing to do on a camera? Probably not. But who's perfect amongst us? Who is perfect amongst us? Who is able to do the right thing the first time around? Have you ever not made a mistake in your life? Have you ever not taken a stance that you wish you wouldn't have taken a stance on? You know, we're fallible by nature. So, sometimes people make mistakes. I'm not apologizing for my words. I meant everything I said. But what I'm saying is I'm apologizing for the way that I react sometimes, because you know, you have to understand that I deal with this in real life. I deal with people that are very emotionally charged. They're speaking right to your face. You're having to swallow your thoughts, your emotions. You're having to handle the situation objectively. You can't just tell them to fuck off. Excuse my language, but you just can't. You can, but I'd be jobless, and then I'd have to do this more often than I do already. You know what I'm saying? Um, but I deal with these type of individuals in real life. I've dealt with them for over 20 something years. And the person that you see on this camera is pretty much who I am 24/7. But everybody has a breaking point. Everybody. And sometimes it's okay to be the bigger person and to say, hey, I just need to leave that alone. Whether you have expertise in it, whether you wrote a book about it, all kinds of stuff. Sometimes it's best to just say, I need to leave that alone. Because before long, you're taking up somebody's battle that doesn't even know that they need defending. And especially if you have friends on these YouTube streets, they get pulled into it or they get associated with your channel or whatever. And I have a friend that caused some controversy recently, and I defended this individual. I've even had him on my channel. I don't even know, if people are associating all the things together, but if they are, that's fine. But what I want to tell you is this, and I'm not trying to be arrogant when I say this. Certain people stand on their beliefs. Certain people stand on their convictions. If you feel that you can't be having your mind changed or your opinion changed, at least give the other person the same benefit of the doubt, because you being able to have that free speech, well, other people have that free speech as well. So don't feel that it's only one sided just because you feel more powerful than the other person. I don't like all the drama that's going on. I don't like all the stuff that's going on. And I know I created probably a little bit of it um by my words last night and the other day. But like I said, man, at particular point you just had enough, you just have enough. And to me, the families, that is a no limit area for me. That is one of those areas that you can talk about anybody under the sun, but don't bring their families into it. And anybody that does that, they just kind of are not very respected in my eyes. Because if you bring a person's family into it, that means um that you don't respect anything about the crime. You don't respect anything about that family. You don't know what that family's going through. You don't know what that family's lived through. You don't know what they deal with night in, night out. And if you did, the way you act sometimes on these platforms, it's almost like you could care less. And you've even used those words. I could give a rat's ass. And that's pretty harsh, man. That's pretty harsh to say that you could give a rat's ass what's going on with these families because you feel that they're greedy grifters. And that is harsh, man. That is harsh stuff right there. You know, yeah, I could write a book. I mean, I've sat across from, drug kingpins. I've really sat across from cartel members, mules. I've worked with the feds, so I was up there not really interviewing, but counseling the upper level people. And I'm going to share this really quickly. I asked this guy, and he was just like a normal guy, and he said, And I was asking him, because I was getting to know him, and I said, so I've always wanted to ask drug people or drug dealers this question. What amount of money is enough for you to walk away, to finally say, well, I've made enough money, I need to quit? And I said, do people really have a number? And he told me, he said, I can't speak for a lot of people, he said, but I can speak for myself. He said, I told myself when I first started, it'd be 10 million. And he said, I got to 9, and then I was spending, I was using, I was, entertaining women, I was doing all this, that, and the other. It dwindled down, and then I got to 10. And then he said, at 10, I told myself 15. He said, I got to 12, and I got busted. He said, I didn't work with anybody per se, like I didn't have anybody working with me. He said, I would drive the drugs by myself in an old beat up truck. I'd drive it to the border, cross the border, drop them, get the money, come back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And, some of the stories that I've heard are quite intense. I've sat across from people that have murdered people. I've sat across from individuals that obviously are chomos, sex offenders. I've sat across from people that have done a lot of things that are not too popular in the world out here. And I've learned a lot, not only doing counseling with them and hearing their stories, but also worked in a prison at one point during all this stuff. So, one thing that is off limit in the street code is the families. You don't fuck with the families, no matter what your opinion is. That is a no no. So I just you're right on that. No amount of money is ever enough for the greedy. Because even if you had $100 million today deposited in your account, and you don't work, you don't have any way to replenish that dollar bill that you spend right off the top of that 100 million, it's going to dwindle away as quickly as you received it. And people forget about that. They forget about that. I'm going to put that comment up here on the screen, Texas. It says there's some sorry ass people on YouTube. I bet if you got face to face with them, it'd be totally different. I believe that you're probably right. You're probably right. Well, my thing is this, though. As far as anything on YouTube, if it's good enough for you to discuss about it, why isn't it good enough for other people to call you out on the same stuff? That's what I don't understand. If you can talk about other people, then why can't somebody call you out on your stuff? Like, if I'm not going to say who this person was, but I've seen other people talk about, being caught on camera and their kids are in the background or whatever, and the kid is being neglected for hours and hours and hours. My whole thing is if you're online all this time and you're talking about somebody else's family, but your house isn't in order, or you're not taking care of your responsibilities because you're so busy worrying about being online, what makes you any better than the person you're talking about? You get what I'm saying? And that's just my point. Just like right now, if you were to see a child in the background and they were just in diapers and they were dirty and all this other stuff and they looked neglected, and somebody said, well, 12 gauge, your child needs you. He's like trying to get your attention. And I'm like, okay, I'll be right with you. And I'm sitting here telling you about other families and what they should be doing. Wouldn't you say, 12 gauge, get your fucking ass off the computer and go take care of your child? Wouldn't you say that? Would you not say that to me? I would hope that you would. I really would. Because this computer does not supersede taking care of a child. Because a lot of these children are not given the choice of being here on this planet. And you to neglect them due to wanting to be an internet superstar, that's not cool, bro. Not cool at all. It's just stuff that I see like that, it just like, come on, man. Come on, bro. I'm no internet bully and I'm no internet hard ass or anything like that, but I will call you on your stuff. I mean, I've done it for 20 something years. Do you expect me just not to call a spade because I see it? You know? But anyways, I've said enough. I need to get off here. Need to take my old ass to the gym and try to stay in shape. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you guys don't take me so serious that you unsub me, because I am a real person. I am, if you unsub me, that's on you. But I try not to cuss a lot. Try to just be who I am. You guys have a wonderful evening, and I will see you soon. I got one question to ask you though. Can you dig it? Can you dig it? If you can't dig it, get yourself a bigger shovel. Maestro, cue that music.